What do hip hop icons like 50 Cent, billionaire tech titans like Jeff Bezos, and well, inmates sitting in maximum security prisons all have in common?
It is a pretty wild list of people, right?
It really is. But they are all obsessive readers of a single book, a book that treats human interaction like this ruthless, high stakes chess match. It's a manual so notoriously disruptive that is frequently banned behind bars.
Yeah, we are talking about Robert Greene's 1998 mega bestseller, The 48 Laws of Power.
Exactly. And that is our mission for this deep dive. You shared this completely fascinating stack of source material with us, academic papers, scientific critiques, philosophical breakdowns, and modern business applications, all trying to decode this text.
And we have a lot to get through today.
We really do. But just to set the ground rules right out of the gate for you listening, we aren't doing this to teach you how to become some, I don't know, Machiavellian sociopath.
Right, far from it. If you approach this text as a simple how-to guide, you are actually missing the profound psychological insights it offers. It's so much deeper than that.
We are here to map the human psyche. We're going to synthesize historical case studies, dig into philosophical frameworks, and look at hard scientific data to uncover the actual mechanics of social dominance.
Because we want to understand where Greene's advice is brilliantly accurate about human nature, and crucially, where it spectacularly backfires in the real world.
Yeah, you can think of this conversation as an advanced masterclass in strategy and human behavior.
And honestly, it's a masterclass you cannot afford to skip, because power dynamics are operating around you whether you choose to acknowledge them or not.
That is so true. The sources you provided approach Greene's text not just as a collection of edgy life hacks, but as an empirical framework.
Yeah, it reflects the fundamental underlying structures of how human beings organize themselves, how we compete, and ultimately how we survive.
Let's start with the cultural impact because it is staggering. I mean, why does a book that essentially teaches you the mechanics of manipulation sell millions of copies and stay relevant for decades?
It's a great question.
You walk into a Hollywood talent agency, it's sitting right on the desk. You go to a Wall Street boardroom, it's basically required reading. You listen to hip-hop, and you have artists like Kanye West or UGK dropping direct references to it. What is the allure here?
Well, the allure is its unapologetic, almost brutal realism. Greene distilled 3,000 years of history, drawing really heavily on Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Sun Tzu's The Art of War, into these 48 maxims.
Right.
But the reason it resonates across such drastically different demographics, from CEOs to inmates, is that it completely strips away the illusion of civilized society.
It just rips the mask right off.
It really does.
Right.
We are conditioned to believe we live in a post-primal world, right? A meritocracy governed by logic, fairness, and HR departments.
Right, the polite email culture.
Exactly. Greene shatters that. He presents a world of feudal courts and backroom plots, suggesting that underneath those polite emails and the corporate synergy, we are still operating on the exact same primal power dynamics as a 17th century monarchy.
One of the academic papers in our sources makes a really striking analogy here. It says Greene treats power the way pathology studies a disease.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Power, in Greene's view, isn't inherently good or bad.
Yeah.
It is an amoral, objective reality.
Yeah.
A pathologist doesn't get angry at a virus for being a virus. They put it under a microscope, study its mechanics, figure out how it infects a host, and then use that knowledge to build an immunity.
That completely explains the intense mythology around the book, especially those prison bans you hear about.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you're studying a virus, you are handling dangerous material. The idea that authorities ban this book in prisons because it teaches inmates how to manipulate gang structures or, outsmart guards, it gives it this irresistible forbidden knowledge vibe.
Though we should probably clarify a point the sources make about those prison bans.
Yeah.
While it is restricted in certain specific U.S. facilities for security reasons, the narrative of it being banned worldwide is highly exaggerated.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Publishers lean into that narrative because it is brilliant marketing.
Right.
I mean, there are no verified global bans in places like China or Iran, despite what the internet forums claim.
It's just the ultimate hype machine.
Exactly.
But here's the paradox that really caught my attention in the sources. Greene himself admits the book goes to an extreme.
Yes, he does.
He has openly stated that anyone who actually practiced all 48 of his laws all the time would be a, and I quote, horrible, ugly person to be around.
Which brings up a fascinating sociological insight. The research suggests that the vast majority of people do not read this book to learn entirely new behaviors to inflict on others.
Okay.
They read it to recognize the subconscious strategies that human beings are already using around them.
Meaning we aren't reading it to learn how to manipulate. We're reading it to put a name to the manipulation we have already experienced.
Precisely. It brings the unconscious into the conscious realm. When your coworker, say, subtly takes credit for your project, or your boss keeps you slightly insecure about your job status, you suddenly have a vocabulary for it. You see the machinery.
But if the author himself says following this makes you an ugly person, why do we idolize the people who use these laws? We revere the cutthroat CEO. We watch documentaries about ruthless politicians. Why do we celebrate the outcome if we find the mechanics so ugly?
Because we are biologically wired to respect dominance and survival. And that brings us to the very foundation of Green's work. The sources spend a lot of time analyzing the philosophical underpinnings of these laws.
Yeah, there is a debate running through the text, right? Are these power dynamics the result of calculated intellectual strategy, or are they just the unavoidable expression of our animal instincts?
Exactly. And the sources provide a deep breakdown of this, tracing Green's influence back to classical philosophy. You realize quickly this isn't just a modern self-help book. It's an application of some of the darkest theories of human nature.
Right, like Thomas Hobbes writing Leviathan back in 1651.
Hobbes is crucial here. He argued that human beings, when left to their own devices, exist in a perpetual state of competition. He famously called it the state of nature, which he described as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Which is such a bleak view of humanity.
It is bleak, but Hobbes believed that power struggles aren't a glitch in the system, they are the system. They are an innate biological reality. We act based on survival and self-interest, not altruism.
Which is a terrifying way to view your morning commute, honestly.
Yeah, it really is.
But if you layer Sigmund Freud on top of Hobbes, it gets even deeper. Freud isn't just talking about physical survival, he's talking about the psyche.
Right.
He argued that our unconscious drives, specifically what he called the id, are constantly seeking gratification and dominance. We have this primal urge to control our environment.
And then Friedrich Nietzsche takes that primal urge and elevates it with his concept of the will to power.
Oh, I love this concept. It's fascinating. Nietzsche argued that the fundamental drive of all living things isn't merely to survive, but to assert oneself. To overcome societal norms, impose your will on the world, and shape your own values. He saw power as an internal, almost creative drive that fuels ambition.
Let me try to synthesize this for you listening. Think of human behavior like a computer system. Freud and Hobbes are explaining the hardware, the primal animalistic drives we're born with. We are biologically wired to survive, to secure resources, and to dominate threats.
That's a great way to put it.
And then thinkers like Sun Tzu and Machiavelli provide the software, the learned intellectual strategies we install to manage and weaponize those primal drives.
That is a brilliant analogy. The hardware gives you the impulse, the software gives you the strategy. Green's book is effectively the user manual for both.
Right.
But what elevates the book from a simple list of aggressive tactics is how it integrates the concepts of rhetoric and timing. And for that, the sources point straight to Aristotle. Because raw dominance just isn't enough. You have to know how to deploy it. Let's look at a specific example to show how this psychology plays out. Law 27. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following.
Yeah, and Green isn't literally telling you to go start a doomsday cult in the desert.
Oh, thankfully.
He is tapping into Freud's theory on group psychology. Freud noted the intense primal human need for a father figure, a messianic leader who offers an all-encompassing ideology. People just crave certainty in a chaotic world.
And we see this mapped onto modern business all the time. The sources use Steve Jobs as the prime example. Look at the almost religious fervor he cultivated around Apple products in the early 2000s.
It was unparalleled.
People weren't just buying an MP3 player or a phone. They were buying into an identity. They were seeking meaning. Jobs understood that psychological void, and he provided the spectacle and the ideology to fill it. He became the visionary father figure of technology.
And Jobs also perfectly embodied another critical concept from the book, Law 35, master the art of timing. This is where Aristotle comes in, specifically his concept of kairos.
Kairos is such a great concept. We should unpack that because it isn't just about reading a clock.
No, it's not. So chronos is chronological time, hours, and minutes. Kairos translates to the opportune moment, the decisive, critical instant where an action can alter the course of events.
The perfect window of opportunity.
Exactly. Aristotle believed that true success lay in discerning that exact millisecond.
So how did Jobs use Kairos with the iPhone?
Well, he notoriously waited. He had the vision for a touchscreen device years before it launched, but he understood the market wasn't ready and the technology wasn't mature.
It would have flopped.
Right. He waited for the exact convergence of battery miniaturization, cellular network speeds, and consumer fatigue with clunky keyboards. He held his fire when eager competitors would have rushed a flawed product to market. That patience, that recognition of the precise moment to strike, is Kairos.
So we have this intense blend of primal instinct and calculated strategy. But I want to pivot to how this actually plays out in everyday interactions. A huge portion of this book is dedicated to the mechanics of perception. It's all about managing how the people in the room see you.
And there is a massive tension in the sources about this. Perception is the actual battlefield of power. Green offers several laws to navigate it, but as you mentioned, they often contradict each other.
Let's take Law 4. Always say less than necessary. The logic here is intoxicating. Green argues that the more you say, the more common you appear, and the more likely you are to say something foolish.
Which is true for a lot of people.
By withholding information and being concise, you make yourself unpredictable. You create an air of mystery.
The psychological mechanism at play is projection. When you are silent, people become uncomfortable. They start projecting their own insecurities and assumptions into the silence you've created.
They fill in the blanks.
Exactly. They assume you know more than you do. You become a blank screen, which projects control.
And then right next to that, you have Law 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Green calls reputation the cornerstone of power. You can intimidate and win just through your reputation.
Yeah, Warren Buffett has that famous quote that perfectly aligns with this. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it.
But here is where the friction begins. Contrasting directly with the idea of fading into silence, you have Law 6. Court attention at all costs.
Right.
Green argues that in a crowded, noisy world, being invisible is akin to being dead. You cannot let yourself get lost in the crowd. You must assert dominance by claiming space, creating controversy if necessary, and forcing people to look at you.
Which is a complete 180.
Wait, hold on. A minute ago, Law 4 told me to shut up, fold my hands, and be a mysterious sphinx. Now Law 6 is telling me to jump on the boardroom table and scream for attention. How can both be true?
This is exactly where we must apply a rigorous scientific lens. Because if you take Green's advice purely at face value without understanding the context, it will destroy your career.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The sources provide a sharp critique of these perception laws, pulling heavily from the empirical social dynamics research at Power University.
Yes, let's break down that research, because this is the reality check you listening actually need right now. Power University studies the actual data of human interaction, what genuinely works in modern organizations, not just 17th century courts.
And what their data shows about Law 4 saying less is fascinating. Green claims silence makes you look like a powerful genius, but the empirical science of group dynamics shows the exact opposite.
Oh, wow.
In a professional setting, the people who talk more actually gain more status. They are assigned more leadership roles by their peers, and they are perceived as significantly more competent.
So if you sit in a meeting and say nothing, trying to project this aura of mystery, you don't look like a kingpin. You just look disengaged, shy, or uninformed. You become invisible.
Precisely. The scientific reality is that Law 4 only works when you already hold immense, unquestionable structural authority over the room.
Right, if you're the boss.
If you are a federal judge, a CEO, or a monarch, your silence carries weight because your power is already cemented.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to climb a hierarchy, silence is career suicide. You have to verbally assert your value, share your ideas, and demonstrate your competence.
So for you listening, how do you know which software to run? When do you play the silent Machiavellian, and when do you play the talkative go-getter?
The advanced strategy is what the researchers call hypercalibration. It requires deep situational awareness. You use Law 4, you say less, when others must earn your approval.
Okay.
When you hold the leverage in a negotiation, state your terms and then shut up. Let the silence work on them. But you talk more, and you shine brighter when you need to socialize, build coalitions, and prove your worth to the people above you.
That distinction is crucial. And what about reputation? Is guarding it as this pristine, untouchable fortress really the best move?
According to the sociological analysis, no. Treating your reputation solely as a fragile glass castle makes you incredibly risk-averse.
You'd just be terrified all the time.
Right, you become socially needy, constantly terrified of offending anyone. The reality of power is that reputation is a tradable resource. It is currency.
I love that concept. Reputation is currency. But if I use my currency, don't I go bankrupt?
Not if the return on investment is high enough. The principle is this: the more one stands to gain by spending their reputation, the more rational it becomes to lose a piece of it.
Okay, so a calculated risk.
Sometimes, to achieve a massive strategic or financial goal, you have to make an unpopular move. You take a reputational hit in the short term, you absorb the criticism, and you spend that social capital because the ultimate gain is worth the cost. You don't just guard reputation, you deploy it.
Let's look at another perception law that hacks human psychology in a completely different way. Law 46, never appear too perfect.
This is one of Green's most profound observations. He warns that appearing flawless inspires intense, silent envy.
And envy is terrifying.
Envy is a dangerous, insidious emotion because people rarely admit to it. They just quietly begin plotting your downfall. To mitigate this, Green advises displaying harmless defects.
The sources use Franklin D. Roosevelt as the classic example of this. FDR was a wealthy, elite, untouchable aristocrat, but his devastating battle with polio paralyzed him from the waist down.
And while it was a massive personal tragedy, politically, it functioned as the ultimate application of Law 46.
How exactly does that work in the human brain, though? Why does weakness make us like him more?
It comes down to threat detection. Our brains, specifically the amygdala, are constantly scanning our environment for threats. When we encounter someone who seems entirely perfect, wealthy, powerful, flawless, our primitive brain flags them as a potential predator or an unbeatable rival.
It triggers that defensive envy.
Exactly. But when FDR displayed this profound physical vulnerability, it short-circuited that threat detection system. The brain stops seeing a predator and starts feeling empathy. His suffering humanized him. It made the struggling masses during the Great Depression feel a deep, almost familial connection to this aristocrat.
It actually connects back to Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch. The idea isn't just about raw domination, it's about embracing the totality of your humanity, flaws and all, to connect deeply with the human experience. Hacking the amygdala by showing a flaw is a brilliant strategy.
It is incredibly effective.
Let's venture into some of the darker territory of the book. This is the section where the book really earns its ruthless reputation, the psychology of alliances, enemies, and betrayal.
Green lays out some highly controversial maxims here, and none is more infamous than Law 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies.
Green's argument here is deeply cynical. He says friends are easily aroused to envy and will betray you at the first opportunity because the familiarity breeds contempt.
Right.
But a former enemy, he says if you pardon an enemy and give them a job, they have something to prove. They will be more loyal than a friend because they are terrified of losing your sudden favor.
He compounds this worldview with Law 13. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude. The argument is that reminding people of past favors is useless.
People forget so fast.
The human memory is short when it comes to gratitude.
Yeah.
You only get what you want by showing them exactly what financial or strategic benefit is in it for them right now.
And then you have Law 14. Pose as a friend, work as a spy, gather intelligence under the guise of casual friendship so you always have leverage over the people around you.
From a purely philosophical standpoint, this is the epitome of psychological egoism. It is a direct echo of Thomas Hobbes's view that humans are fundamentally self-interested machines. It also mirrors Sun Tzu's emphasis on espionage and deception as the ultimate necessary tools for victory on the battlefield.
But again, we need the scientific reality check here, because if you listening take Law 2 into your life tomorrow, you are heading for a disaster. The sources absolutely tear Law 2 apart.
Completely dismantle it.
The idea that you shouldn't trust friends and should actively seek to empower former enemies is scientifically, mathematically debunked.
It is entirely dismantled by modern science. Whether you look at evolutionary biology, game theory, or organizational psychology, the data is unequivocal. Cooperation and proven tested friendships drastically outperform strangers and enemies in almost every conceivable scenario.
Yeah.
High-trust networks are the biological and sociological engine of all significant human achievement.
Let's break down the mechanism of why that is. Why is a friend better than an enemy in game theory?
Because of transaction costs. When you build an alliance with a known, reliable entity, a friend, The friction of doing business drops to near zero.
You don't have to watch your back constantly.
Exactly. You don't have to spend energy second-guessing their motives, writing ironclad legal contracts for every interaction, or worrying about a knife in the back. You move faster. If you follow law too, constantly viewing your friends with paranoia and deliberately hiring enemies, you maximize your transaction costs. You spend all your energy managing betrayal instead of creating value.
The sources mention a hilarious but genuinely tragic example of this from the internet. There is a Reddit user from the 48 Laws of Power subreddit who literally tried applying Law 2 in their real life.
Yes, the case study of the amateur Machiavelli.
Exactly. So this person read the book and decided their normal social circle was just too boring. So they actively started distrusting their loyal friends, pushing them away, and trying to manipulate their rivals and people who actively dislike them to build leverage.
Which is just a terrible idea.
Predictably, it spectacularly backfired. Their enemies didn't suddenly respect them, they just used the opening to exploit them. And their real friends realized this person was acting like a paranoid sociopath and abandoned them. They ended up completely isolated and ruined their own social life.
It is the perfect illustration of the danger of reading green without emotional intelligence. Applying these adversarial laws rigidly makes beginners look inept. As the Power University data highlights over and over, sustainable power stems from providing high value and building mutual benefit. It does not come from alienating your support system to play mind games.
And that profound misunderstanding of human connection ties directly into the critique of Law 13. The idea that you must only appeal to self-interest. Now, obviously, self-interest matters. In a business deal, people want to know the ROI. But if you are constantly cynic baiting...
Cynic baiting being the assumption that everyone is only out for a quick buck, devoid of any higher morals.
Right. If you cynic bait your team, you completely ignore the higher values that drive human beings. The psychology of intrinsic motivation is incredibly powerful. People want shared purpose. They want a belief in a mission.
You want to belong to something bigger.
Yes, those things build what business strategists call missionary engagement. And that kind of deep emotional loyalty is infinitely stronger than a purely transactional alliance.
It's the difference between a mercenary and a patriot.
Yeah.
If you only appeal to transactional self-interest, you will only attract mercenaries. And what do mercenaries do? They abandon you the exact millisecond someone else offers them a slightly better deal. True power, enduring power, involves inspiring people to follow a vision, not just handing out paychecks.
So we've navigated the treacherous waters of perception and alliances. Let's talk about survival in the hierarchy. Because let's be real, most of you listening to this aren't commanding an army. You are navigating a corporate ladder, a startup ecosystem, or a complex organizational structure. You are dealing with bosses, managers, and rivals.
And Green has very specific, often terrifying rules for this. Let's start with what might be the single most famous law in the entire book.
Oh man, Law 1, never outshine the master. Just the title gives you a chill.
The core premise of Law 1 is that you must always make those above you feel comfortably superior. If you display your talents too brilliantly, if you're too charismatic or too innovative, you will trigger their deep-seated insecurities and envy.
And because they're the boss.
Exactly. Because they hold structural power over you, they will destroy you out of sheer self-preservation.
The historical example Green uses for this is incredibly cinematic. It's the story of Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister for King Louis XIV of France in the 17th century.
Yes, a perfect example.
Fouquet was brilliant. He was charming, a patron of the arts, and incredibly wealthy, and he wanted to secure his position and become the king's indispensable right hand.
So Fouquet decides to throw a party. But not just any party. To curry favor with King Louis, he throws the most lavish, spectacular, mind-bending festival the country had ever seen at his newly built chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte.
Just going totally over the top.
We're talking about custom theatrical performances by Molière, massive firework displays, and feasts that lasted for days.
He thought he was proving his worth, right? He thought the king would say, "Look how magnificent my minister is, I'm lucky to have him." But how did human psychology actually react?
Well, King Louis XIV was a deeply insecure young monarch trying to consolidate his absolute power. As he walked the grounds of this magnificent estate, he didn't feel pride in his minister. He felt profoundly threatened. He felt eclipsed. The sheer scale of Fouquet's wealth and taste made the king feel small.
And the consequences were immediate and brutal.
The very next day, King Louis XIV had Nicolas Fouquet arrested by the captain of the Musketeers on trumped-up charges of embezzlement. Fouquet spent the rest of his entire life in solitary confinement.
It's just completely erased.
Yes. His chateau was essentially looted by the king, who took the architect and the landscape designer to build Versailles. The lesson is undeniable. Fouquet outshone the master, and it cost him his freedom and his life.
It is a terrifying cautionary tale. And Green couples this defensive strategy with incredibly aggressive laws on how to deal with rivals. Take Law 15, crush your enemy.
Totally. Yet Green argues that if you leave an adversary even partially intact, they will recover, they will harbor a deep resentment, and they will eventually seek revenge. You cannot afford half measures.
He uses the chilling historical example of Rome utterly destroying the city of Carthage after the Punic Wars. They didn't just defeat the Carthaginian army, they burned the city to the ground, enslaved the survivors, and famously salted the earth so that no crops could ever grow there again. Carthage was erased from the map.
And similarly, Law 42. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. If a group or a department is causing you trouble, don't waste your time fighting the individual followers. Identify the charismatic leader, the center of gravity. Remove them, and the group will organically fall apart.
But again, we must translate this for you listening today, because if you salt the earth in a corporate boardroom, or if you apply Law 1 under an insecure middle manager today, the outcome is very different than in 17th century France.
Yes, let's look at the data. If you are sitting at your desk right now dealing with an insecure manager who takes credit for your work, do you hide your talents? Do you play dumb just to keep your boss feeling like King Louis XIV?
I mean, that sounds miserable.
It is miserable, and the scientific critique here is vital. If you apply Law 1 strictly under an average defensive boss, you are volunteering for a dead-end career. The data from Harvard Business Review is abundantly clear on this. Managers who act as door openers, those who advocate for their team boost, your chances of promotion by 30%. Conversely, staying in the exact same role under a defensive boss for more than 3 years drastically slashes your chances of long-term advancement.
It's like voluntarily staying in the minor leagues because the coach is jealous of your swing. You are killing your own ambition to appease someone else's fragile ego.
Exactly. So what is the advanced modern strategy? You don't necessarily outshine a toxic boss to their face. You don't embarrass them in a meeting. But you absolutely must ensure your brilliance is visible to the broader organization. You network with their bosses, or you build alliances with other departments.
Or more practically, you jump ship.
Yes. You maneuver to find a leader who possesses the self-assurance to actually want you to shine. A great modern leader understands that having brilliant subordinates elevates their own status. Power in the modern economy is fluid. You are not a serf tied to the land. You do not have to stay trapped under a fearful master.
We've established that hiding your talents from a fragile 17th century king keeps you alive. But what does this look like when the king isn't a monarch, but an algorithm?
That is the big question.
This brings us to Section 6. I want to explore how these feudal court politics mutate when applied to Silicon Valley, venture capital, and SaaS companies. Do powerful tech founders still use these ancient laws today?
They absolutely do. But the execution has evolved dramatically. The battlefield is no longer a physical castle. It is an ecosystem, a digital platform, an API.
Right.
The sources provide a fascinating breakdown of how these laws apply to scaling modern tech monopolies. Let's look at Jeff Bezos and the early days of scaling Amazon. Bezos is a masterclass in applying Green's principles at a global corporate scale.
Unpack that. How did Bezos use the 48 laws to win the publisher wars?
In the 1990s, when Amazon was just selling books, Bezos utilized Law 6, court attention at all costs. He aggressively branded Amazon as Earth's biggest bookstore, claiming mental real estate even when the company was burning cash.
Just dominating the conversation.
But the real masterstroke was his application of Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you.
How do you make massive established publishing houses dependent on a startup?
By controlling the distribution channel. Bezos built a platform with such an obsessive focus on customer experience that the consumer mass migrated to Amazon. Once he captured the audience, the publishers realized they could not afford not to sell on Amazon.
They were trapped.
He became their primary lifeline to revenue. Once they were utterly dependent on him, he used his massive scale and proprietary sales data to dictate terms, squeeze their margins, and essentially crush the traditional retail competition.
That perfectly transitions into how these old laws map onto new digital rules. Law 18 says, do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. Green meant don't hide in a castle where you are cut off from information. But the sources translate this brilliantly for tech. In software, Law 18 translates to build data moats.
Think of an API or a cloud infrastructure as the modern fortress. If a SaaS company holds all of a client's historical data, their workflows, and their integrations, the switching cost for that client becomes astronomically high.
You literally can't leave.
The software becomes the environment the client lives in. If they leave, their operations halt. You haven't built a wall to keep people out. You've built a system that keeps them locked in.
It's biological. A cell dies if it stops exchanging information with its environment. You make yourself the environment.
Exactly.
What about Steve Jobs? We talked about his timing with the iPhone, but the sources highlight his return to Apple in 1997 as a masterclass in another law.
Law 45. Preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once.
Why not? If something is broken, why not just burn it down and fix it immediately?
Because human psychology naturally resists rapid structural change. It induces panic, uncertainty, and a sense of loss. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple, the company was hemorrhaging money and weeks away from bankruptcy. He knew he had to completely gut the product line.
But he didn't instantly walk in, fire everyone, and announce a pivot to consumer electronics.
No, because that would have tanked the stock and caused a mutiny. Instead, he preached innovation. He used the Think Different campaign to reinvigorate the cultural spirit of Apple. But operationally, he implemented his ruthless cuts gradually. He radically simplified the messy product line down to a simple 4-quadrant grid, but he maintained the illusion of continuity with Apple's rebellious past. He reduced the anxiety of his employees and the market by wrapping radical change in familiar closing.
The sources mention he used Hegel's dialectic. Can we break that down simply?
Sure. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was a philosopher who proposed that progress happens through a specific pattern, a thesis, which is the status quo, meets an antithesis, a radical new idea. And through their friction, they create a synthesis, a compromise that moves things forward.
So Jobs didn't just smash the status quo. He merged the old Apple identity with his new rigorous discipline to create a synthesis. Gradual evolution, not abrupt disruption.
That is brilliant. And the sources also point out how Law 28, interaction with boldness, takes on a whole new meaning in the era of artificial intelligence.
Right.
In the current tech landscape, Law 28 translates directly to the startup mantra. Prototype fast, ship faster. Timidity is brutally punished by the market. The cost of hesitating, of waiting until a product is perfect, is infinite when technological cycles are moving in weeks, not years. You must claim the space boldly, release the beta version, and iterate based on the data.
But here is where the evolution gets really interesting. The sources suggest that to survive today, modern founders have to actually invent new laws that completely contradict Robert Greene's original text. Greene's entire philosophy is built on concealment, smoke and mirrors, and hiding your intentions.
Which brings us to the modern counter law. Transparency as a weapon.
Why is transparency a weapon now?
Because we live in a hyper-connected digital panopticon. Information leaks instantly. A toxic internal email can be on Twitter in 30 seconds.
Right, there are no secrets anymore.
In this environment, concealment often backfires catastrophically, destroying consumer trust. Today, founders use selective, radical transparency building in public, openly discussing failures, sharing roadmaps to build disproportionate trust and brand loyalty. Transparency disarms critics and cynics far more effectively than silence ever could.
And the other new modern law is architect culture. Greene wrote a lot about creating cults of personality around a single, charismatic leader.
But a modern company cannot scale if it relies entirely on a single founder's charisma. A strong, deeply ingrained company culture is the modern equivalent of a cult-like following. It scales beyond the individual. It attracts top talent, repels bad fits, and insulates the company's productivity during times of crisis. The system becomes a leader.
We've praised the brilliance of Greene's insights, but we have to address the structural blind spots of the book. For all its granular detail on individual ambition, the text has severe limitations. First and foremost, as we've touched on, are the glaring internal contradictions.
The book is a minefield of them. Greene tells you in Law 34 to act like a king to be treated like one. He says you must stand out, demand respect, and assert your uniqueness.
Yeah.
But then, a few chapters later, he tells you to play the perfect courtier and behave like others, which means you must conform, flatter, and blend into the background.
He tells you to keep others in suspended terror, which requires cultivating a massive distance and isolating yourself as an unpredictable force. But then he explicitly warns you in Law 18 to never build fortresses because isolation makes you a visible, paranoid target.
Yeah.
So is the book just fundamentally flawed? Is he just contradicting himself to sell chapters?
The contradictions aren't necessarily a structural flaw. Rather, they highlight the central truth of power. It is entirely contextual.
Okay, that makes sense.
There is no universal, one-size-fits-all law of human behavior. The strategy that makes you a dominant force in a cutthroat boardroom negotiation will get you instantly fired if you try it during a collaborative, creative brainstorm. You have to run the right software for the right room.
But the deeper, more profound critique of the book comes from sociology.
Yes, the sources lean on the heavyweights of sociological theory thinkers like Michel Foucault, Pierre Bourdieu, and Max Weber. And their primary critique is that Green's laws are hyper-individualistic.
What does that mean in practice?
Green presents a fantasy world where power is just a chess match played between two isolated individuals in a vacuum. He assumes a perfectly level playing field where anyone, regardless of their background, can just decide to act like a king and suddenly the world will treat them like one.
But sociologists know that power doesn't work like that. Power is profoundly structural. It's shaped by institutional norms, your class, your gender, your race, and what Pierre Bourdieu called symbolic capital.
Let's pause and explain symbolic capital, because that is a crucial concept.
Please do.
Symbolic capital is the invisible prestige or authority you carry based on societal recognition. It's having a degree from Harvard. It's having a verified blue check mark next to your name.
Yep.
It's a military medal or a specific accent. It is the unspoken credibility that society grants you before you even open your mouth.
So, to put this in real terms, a 22-year-old intern cannot just walk into the CEO's office, decide to apply Law 34 and act like a king, and expect anything other than security escorting them out the front door. They lack the symbolic capital to run that software.
Precisely. Power is heavily mediated by the environment. If you apply Green's aggressive Machiavellian laws rigidly in a modern collectivist company culture that values psychological safety, you will trigger severe organizational antibodies. You will be flagged as toxic immediately.
The sources argue that extracting military tactics from Napoleon or political maneuvers from the Ming Dynasty and applying them decontextualized into a 2025 corporate environment is a massive analytical leap.
It is the definition of using the wrong tool for the job. Power is not just about brute strength, deception, or raw ambition. In the modern world, power is about reading the room, understanding the invisible social contracts, and recognizing your actual structural leverage within a complex system.
Which perfectly sets up our conclusion. We've torn the book apart. We've analyzed its historical and primal roots, we've debunked its toxic advice with science, and we've seen its digital applications.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. Let's synthesize this into an ultimate framework for you listening. Based on the totality of the sources, the empirical data, and the philosophy, how do we rank these laws? Let's start with the absolute most dangerous laws to apply in modern life.
The sources are unified on this. The most dangerous laws are those that encourage alienation and paranoia. Law 2. Using enemies over friends. As we discussed, this destroys the trust networks necessary for emotional and professional survival.
Right.
And Law 18. Building fortresses. Isolating yourself cuts you off from the flow of information, which is the lifeblood of decision-making.
I'd add Law 16 to the danger list. Use absence to increase respect and honor. The romantic idea here is that if you disappear, people will realize your worth, miss you, and value you more.
But the modern reality check is harsh.
Exactly. If you haven't already established massive leverage and undeniable, irreplaceable value, absence doesn't make the heart grow fonder. It just means you are forgotten, out of sight, out of mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You cannot strategically withdraw until you are utterly indispensable. Now, on the flip side, what are the most genuinely useful laws for modern business and life? They are the laws grounded in strategic empathy and foresight. Law 13. Appeal to self-interest. While we critiqued its cynical application, the core truth remains vital. You must always frame deals, negotiations, and requests around the other party's benefit. You have to deeply understand their incentives.
Then there's Law 29. Plan all the way to the end. This is incredible for avoiding the anchoring effect of short-term reactive thinking. You don't just react to the immediate crisis in front of you. You map out the second and third-order ripple effects of your actions. It's playing chess, not checkers.
And perhaps the most vital law for navigating today's rapid pace is Law 48. Assume formlessness. This draws heavily from Taoist philosophy, specifically the concept of Wu Wei, or effortless action.
How does formlessness work in business?
It means maintaining extreme cognitive flexibility. Do not fall in love with a rigid business plan. Do not trap yourself in a fixed identity or a single way of doing things. When the market shifts or new technology emerges, you don't fight it. You flow around it like water. In the startup world, this is the ability to pivot seamlessly. In your personal life, it is the psychological resilience to adapt to shifting circumstances without breaking.
Let's pull all of this together into a four-step power framework.
Great.
If you are listening to this and you want to distill its entire complex, contradictory ecosystem into actionable strategy, here's what the sources point to. Step 1. Acknowledge your innate drives. Understand the hardware.
That's the baseline.
Recognize that you and every single person you interact with have deep biological impulses for status, security, and control, just as Freud and Hobbes described. Stop pretending the office is a purely logical place.
Step 2. Read the room and adjust to the context. This is Aristotle's kairos. Power is entirely contextual. You cannot use a 17th century courtier's tactic in a modern workspace without adapting it. You must analyze the structural capital, the culture, and the specific leverage at play before you make a move.
Step 3. Build genuine value and cooperation first. Ignore Green's advice to alienate friends and empower rivals. The hard scientific data proves that high-trust networks, intrinsic motivation, and proven alliances are the true engines of long-term power. You need a foundation of real, tangible value before you can play any advanced strategic games.
And step 4. Keep your strategy fluid. Embrace formlessness. The moment your tactics become predictable, you become vulnerable to those who are paying attention.
It is a profound shift in perspective, and it brings us back to a timeless concept we touched on early in the week, Summer. The deep dive power itself is ethically neutral. You might find some of Robert Greene's laws distasteful, manipulative, or even cruel. But just as pathology must study a deadly disease in order to cure it, we must study the mechanics of manipulation to understand human nature. You simply cannot protect yourself against manipulation or effectively advocate for good in the world if you refuse to understand how the dark arts actually work.
Exactly. Willful ignorance of power dynamics is not a moral virtue. It is a critical vulnerability. True wisdom lies not merely in avoiding power, but in understanding it deeply, mastering its mechanics, and then making the conscious choice of how to wield it responsibly.
That is the ultimate takeaway. We spent this entire deep dive analyzing how to dominate others, how to outmaneuver rivals, and how to navigate a highly cynical world. We've mapped the predatory ecosystem. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on.
Please do.
Consider the philosophical concept of master morality that Nietzsche explored, which we touched on earlier. We spend so much energy worrying about how to manage perceptions, how to crush rivals, and how to win the approval of the hierarchy. But what if the absolute highest form of power isn't the ability to manipulate the people in the room? What if true, unshakable power is the total, liberating freedom of no longer needing their validation at all?
That is a remarkable thought. The ultimate expression of power is simply self-mastery.
So, the next time you walk into a high-stakes meeting or you are navigating a tricky conversation with a boss or a friend, take a step back and observe the subtle dynamics at play. Look for the invisible biological hardware and the strategic software running the room. You now have the psychological toolkit to see the matrix. Keep questioning, keep observing, and keep diving deep.